Okay. Hi everybody, it's Mark with exoticcarplayplace. Back at you today, doing a follow-up video. You'll notice I did a video just about a week ago on the BMW E60, specifically talking about the fuel economy that you can receive driving an E60 BMW. Now you'd have to expect a car with 510 horsepower, or 507 to be specific, you're not going to get spectacular fuel economy. But you can make things a little better for yourself if you follow some simple tricks. And today's video happens to be around hypermiling. That's the latest craze that people are talking about, hypermiling. In the advent of all the excessive amount of ups and downs and the value of oil and gas, the costs at the pump are changing every single day. And because that's happening, people are looking for creative ways to drive their cars to reduce their operating costs. So there's a term that has evolved called hypermiling. And funny enough, it's a term that is actually quite new to me. It was introduced some time ago by actually one of my subscribers mentioned it. And I'm really excited that they brought this to my attention because I did some research, and because of that, I'm going to deliver that to you guys today and talk about hypermiling and what it really means. So again, in follow-up to my how much the fuel consumption is on the M5, today we'll talk hypermiling. Okay, so hypermiling, in short, is basically the art of consuming as little gas as possible with what you've got going on. Now you say, what is the point of that? Why would you buy an E60 M5, or for that matter, a Lamborghini Gallardo, which I also talked about in fuel consumption ratings? Why would you buy these cars if you're worried about fuel mileage? Well, trust me, fuel mileage was not really the first thing I considered. But as time goes on, you know what? There's always creative ways. People are always interested in saving some money. Hey, you're not always revving this thing to 8,000 RPM, are you? A lot of times you're doing a trip from city to city or on the highway, coasting along, and it's basically mindless mileage. And so you're not there to really perform. You're not there for performance driving. You're strictly going from A to B, and sometimes you're covering a long distance doing that. Or sometimes you're just driving in city driving, you're just trying to get home from work, or you're just doing a simple trip somewhere in the city or on the freeway. Whatever that is, not all the time are you driving this thing to 8,000 RPM. A lot of times you're only driving it to 3,000, 4,000 RPM because that's more or less a standard driving style. So when you are driving it in simpler terms, how can you do things to extend your mileage? We already know the mileage of these cars is horrendous. It's absolutely brutal. And I mentioned that in my last video, so if you're curious what those numbers are, please check out my other video. But moving right along, hypermiling is sort of the style in which trying to do certain little things and tricks that are going to prevent you using more fuel than you need to use. Now, let's start basically what that means is adding weight to a car, increasing rolling resistance, on and off the throttle and the brake. Those are all things that really consume gas and excessive amounts of fuel. If you're in traffic, for example, and I'm going to kind of share with you guys how I extend my range. And this goes for city driving, this goes for highway driving. And because it's an M5, and because it's such a gas guzzler, these tips are really going to help you. If you drive one of these cars or have something similar to this, you're really going to want to pay attention. And maybe you do some of these things already, but I'm going to say for this point, you guys, listen up. Hopefully some of these little tricks help you. At the very least, save you a few dollars here and there. You're not trying to save the world, although there are a lot of people considered, true hypermilers now that really do believe in doing it for their reasons, which has to do with saving the environment, reducing emissions, fog, smog, doing all those things. They're trying to save on that. They're also trying to save on wear and tear. They're trying to make the roads safer. Now, how are they doing that? Well, some things that you can do to help improve this economy of driving a car like this are, number one, don't excessively idle the car. If the weather's decent outside, start the car, and I've mentioned this also in other videos, don't let it idle too long, but also don't go hard. If the car's not fully warm, don't race the engine. That's very, very bad for it. But that kind of works together. So the idea is start the car, let it run for a minute, that's it. If the weather's decent, if it's not too cold out, and off you go. So the idea is don't spend too much time idling. That kills fuel economy. Another thing that can kill fuel economy, and hypermilers as it were, like to do other things. For example, using the lowest possible engine oil weight that you can use specified by that auto manufacturer. So instead of using, for example, a 2050, if you can use a 1040 or something like that, it's a little bit thinner, but that's going to potentially give you less rotating mass resistance within the engine, and that's also going to assist you with rolling down the road with less resistance. The other thing, same thing goes with the transmission, the gearbox. If you have a manual transmission, there's typically a gear oil in there. Use synthetic oils. In the differential, use synthetic in the gearbox if it is specified for that vehicle, of course. Don't do anything that's not spec'd. Another thing hypermilers like to do is fill up the tires. Make sure your tires are right up to maximum allowable safe operating pressure for that vehicle. Without doing that, you're basically increasing that rolling resistance, and that ultimately slows you down. If you fatten them up, if you tighten up that tire, you've probably seen that before. When you freshly tighten up a tire with, you pump it up full of air, all of a sudden the vehicle just sort of rolls around a lot easier. Well, that is because it's a stiffer, more rigid. There's less give in the tire and the sidewalls. Everything's more rigid. Now be careful with that. Don't go too much. Then it becomes a safety concern, and as well, the tires can wear out prematurely, of course. Some other things that you have to consider. So just think about how you drive. Hypermilers, by the very essence, try to use no gas, no brakes, no steering. Well, that seems totally counterproductive. That sort of goes opposite of the essence of driving a car, doesn't it? It's not the way you would drive on a racetrack. It's not even fun style of driving. But if you're doing ho-hum driving anyway, and you're just doing a simple commute from home, or you're driving from A to B, or traveling between cities, and really all you're doing is covering distance, these tips will help you a lot. So number one, turning the steering wheel excessively. For example, lots of lane changes, sharp corners quickly. Those all, that scrubbing action of the wheels tends to slow that vehicle down. So turning excessively. So try to eliminate that. Another thing is, you see a green light, punch it. No, don't do that. That's the worst thing you can do. If you hammer it off the green light, you're pouring the gas out the tail end. So you don't want to do that. What you do want to do is take off very gradually, okay? Another thing is braking, because when you're braking, what are you doing? You're wiping off, you're blowing away energy. You're consuming energy, and that waste is going through the brakes, through the brake dust, and lo and behold, you've just wasted the gas that you spent getting up to speed in the first place. So why would you brake? Brake when you need to slow down, or if it's an emergency, absolutely. But instead of waiting till you get right up to that device, that element, that person, that car, that light, that obstacle, instead of waiting till you're up on it, look ahead. Look down the road. You're going to see this stuff way in advance. If you're looking far enough down the road, some of these things you can already start predicting. If you see some obstacle and it's a slower traffic way ahead, start slowing up way back. Just take your foot off the gas, coast. And as you can see, you're coming up on traffic. As you see them start to proceed, don't get on it right away, because there's always a bit of a delay by the time the cars at the back start moving. You don't want to be on them and then still have to use the brakes anyway. So what you want to do is let everything start moving. And if you're coming up to slow moving traffic, coast very slowly. Do not get on the gas. Try to minimize braking unless it's not safe to not brake. Minimize braking and gas when you don't need it. Those are key things. Also, if you look in the E60 M5 here and you scroll through the iDrive system, and a lot of vehicles these days have this. iDrive systems in the BMWs. Benz has products like that. Even pretty much almost any modern day vehicle that's, more than your base minimum car now pretty much has some form of basic trip computer. Sometimes it gives you calculated fuel economy. Sometimes it gives you real-time fuel economy. Utilize that. So you go into your iDrive, you hit the I, but you'll notice on the right-hand side here, there's your fuel economy on the fly. You're able to get the real-time fuel economy, the average, the range, and everything else. Now you're going to want to utilize this because this is going to give you the real-time, on-the-move kind of fuel economy and what you're going to expect. This is going to assist you in how you regulate the gas pedal. There are also instruments you can buy that can do quick real-time calculations as far as your fuel consumption. Use those tools. Those tools will give you a real good insight to what your driving style is doing for you. Is it consuming more fuel? We'll see, right? That's what the instruments are for. They'll tell you what you need to know. There's other techniques. Now, more advanced techniques, and I by no means am condoning this. These are relatively, reduce dramatically the safety margin. But some hypermilers believe in a couple of advanced techniques. For example, drafting large trucks. So if you're on the highway or you're on the freeway and you see that big cube truck in front of you, one belief is you get right up on him. So you're following him within a few feet, and that circulation that's happening at the back of that truck tends to pull your car along. It drags you along, and you can actually dramatically reduce your fuel economy just by staying in his tailwind because the turbulence that he's producing. That can also give you extensive fuel economy savings. One other thing, this is even more risky, and I don't condone it. I'm simply expressing some of the things that people are doing for hypermiling, and that happens to be shutting your vehicle off while it's in motion or at the lights. I mean, after all, if you look at a lot of modern day vehicles, hey, I've driven some vehicles lately, even a Porsche 911. I drove that car, and every time you pull up to a set of lights, hit the brake, poof, the car turns off. And then as soon as you go to engage and get moving, it basically starts, almost like running the starter, but you're not turning it on, and the car's doing it automatically. Well, some of these people are simulating that. And the same thing goes with those cars like Prius and such. These hybrid cars, they all utilize similar functions where the engine, the internal combustion engine, is actually shut right off when it's not in use. But some of these hypermilers are actually doing that as they're cruising along. If they anticipate a long slowdown before, say, a red light or a stop sign, a lot of them are coasting and turning their car off while they coast. Now be careful. When you do that, you lose your power brakes, you lose your power steering, so your accident avoidance goes out the window. So be very careful. Again, I do not condone that. I don't personally do that, but that is what some of these folks are doing. Now, there have been arguments. Why is this so unsafe and why are people doing this? Some of these hypermilers, the real hardcore people, the hypermilers as it were, are actually of the belief that they are safer drivers than your standard driver because they're more alert. They're more aware. They're watching for those little things. They're looking ahead. They're observing everything around them. And there might be some truth to that. So that's their argument for utilizing those advanced techniques. But again, I'm here to strictly express to you what hypermiling really looks like. Now, I've also had a recent request by one of you guys out there to show some hypermiling on the M5. Well, I'm just explaining some of the things that you can do with the M5 and, of course, with general cars as well that can save you some fuel. I'm not driving the car today, and I can certainly show that down the road sometime, pardon the pun. But with the M5, what I would suggest is, number one, don't drive with big bulky shoes because you don't get the feel of the gas pedal. That's another little trick you want to make sure you utilize. Use either very thin-soled shoes, or some of these people actually recommend driving in your socks. I know that sounds funny, but some people will actually do that because you get a lot better sense of what the throttle's doing, a lot more sensitivity on the gas pedal. So some people are actually driving in their socks. The other thing is, again, I mentioned no hard accelerations. With the M5, my take would be leave it out of auto mode, but definitely use the paddle shifters and watch those revs. Keep the revs down below, say below 3,000 RPM whenever you can. There's no need to race up to 8,000. That's not what you're trying to accomplish when you're just commuting. So what you want to do is keep the revs down, and the best way to do that is regulating with the throttle, very slight throttle inputs, and shifting allows you manually to keep that rev count down. If you allow it to go in auto mode, sometimes the car does things that will allow the RPMs to come up a little higher before it shifts. You want to have full control. So my advice to you would be take it over in manual mode, keep the revs down to a point, and with your basically your trip computer and your monitor system, you're able to determine where that optimal RPM is for saving fuel. And then another little trick is that you see people do this all the time, and I've seen a lot of people do this when they're trailering something, pulling a boat, a trailer, or whatever you happen to have. And it's with a truck, for example. Vehicles that say have a little less power have to get more creative. So there's other reasons for trying to use these techniques. Some of these techniques not only are there to extend your mileage, but what if you're running out of range? This car here has poor range. We talked about that already on my last video. It has an exceptionally poor range. So sometimes you have to engage in some of these activities and some of these different techniques to get you to the next gas station. You don't want to punch it and get on it and drive it really hard to the next gas station and then just run out of gas 300 yards from the gas station, do you? So you want to learn some of those tricks. They can help you even extending your range just from that perspective, for convenience even, for that matter. Now, back to what these trucks and trailers are doing with this car, or with any car for that matter. What can also help you extensively is not just on the straightaways, and I already talked about minimizing gas and brake inputs and steering inputs, but also when you're coming down a big hill and then there's another hill coming up on the other side. That's a very typical lay of the land. Don't just coast down this hill at slow speed and then hit the bottom of the hill and then having to put 3/4 throttle to get back up that hill. Sometimes what you do is anticipate, give yourself a little bit of room, pick up a little extra speed coming down the hill, and then as you transition to come back up the hill, as you're climbing the hill and you're losing speed naturally because you don't want to put too much throttle input in, you want to regulate very light throttle. As you're coming up the hill, you're slowing down. That's okay. It's slowly losing speed, scrubbing speed. At that point, if you learn your car and you learn the technique right, if you do it just right, you'll slowly relinquish gas input, back. And then once you crest that hill, that's when you're basically right off the throttle. And then you're coasting over the hill with zero throttle. And then you can either continue on the horizontal, if that's what it takes, you can keep on trucking, or whatever it takes at that point. That's for a simple up and down. If you're climbing in the mountains and you've got miles upon miles of uphill, that's kind of hard to do that. But these are some tricks and some tips that I thought I'd share with you guys on hypermiling your E60 M5, because these are gas hogs, or many other cars. A lot of people are doing that, and a lot of people are doing it with little 3 and 4 cylinder cars already, trying to extend their range up to 100, 120 miles per gallon. Something like this, wouldn't it be sweet to get 25 or 30 miles to the gallon with an E60 M5? A lot of these people are claiming that they're able to far exceed the EPA ratings of the rated fuel economy of these cars. They're actually able to exceed that by using some of these aggressive techniques for driving and hypermiling. So, everybody, I hope you liked the video. In summary, I just wanted to show you and explain to you some of the techniques, because we all know the cost of ownership of an E60 M5 can be quite high. Why not learn some of these extra little cost-saving measures? Over the lifetime of that vehicle, that can save you a lot of money. So, everybody, I do hope you definitely liked the video. Please make sure you do share, like, and subscribe below. And I'd love to see you guys on the next video. Talk to you then. Bye-bye.